at Earth through telescope. My spaceship is clean and I love my job. Music of space scrolls in my ear. I'm dreaming of girls and six-pack of beer. I am a rocket man.
I, too, am a rocket man. So welcome back to another thrilling installment of Storytime Saturdays. We're at 78 episodes already, which is pretty darn good, I'd say. Amazing what you can do when you actually stick to it, and you don't have anything... And you have a passion project, I mean. You just want to read people books and stories. This is another installment of, or a continuation of The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein. And at this point, the revolutionary coup has succeeded. There has been some dissent. It has not gone extremely smoothly, but neither has it been wholly unsuccessful. It has gone... They have pulled off their coup better than they had any right to expect. They just delivered their Declaration of Independence over the airwaves. Earth now knows that the loonies are loose. Or at least, free of authority's constraints. This is where things get crunchy for the revolution, because they... declaring independence is all well and good. The problem is actually enforcing that and actually getting anything out of the deal. They want fair representation. They want a fair shake, basically, and right now they are not getting that. They are largely used as borderline slave labor. They don't make much. Any money they do make is all in authority script, so it has no real value outside of their little bubble. Not that they have any real desire to go outside that bubble, but let's set that particular factoid aside. They don't feel like they're being treated fairly, and they're right. This probably wouldn't be an issue if everyone there were all people who'd been shipped up there as prisoners, and everybody there was part of the penal colony. But the fact of the matter is, they're not. A lot of them are descendants of people who were sent to a penal colony. But because of the lower gravity, they could never go back and survive on Earth. So they're forced to live in these conditions that are fit only for prisoners. And frankly, that's just not fair, is it? So, the revolution was declared and went off. So now it is. Where are you? I just lost my page. Yay! Glorious, glorious. This is wonderful. I have lost page. This is not so ideal. Alright, I should be able to get at least 2 chapters in today. Time, as ever, on Saturdays is somewhat more limited than I'd like. Actually, how long is chapter 17? I might be able to get 3. No, 17's a long one. Sugar. Well, we'll see where we're at when we get to chapter 17, and we'll go from there. How about that? How does that sound to you moonhounds? Haha. Somebody will misconstrue that. Good for them. Okay. So we're at chapter 15 of... Or is it just 15 in general? Yeah, it's 15 in general. Chapter 15, I don't remember what the total chapter count is. We're about 2/3 of the way through the book. As ever, I'm looking ahead, thinking, okay, what am I going to do next? I'm still mentally coin flipping whether I'm going to do an interlude where I read The Freeze Frame Revolution by Peter Watts, like I had kind of originally wanted, or if I go straight to Artemis to see if I can get Artemis at least started by the end of the year. Because this is still going to take me like actually, how many pages is that? 1, 2, 3. This will probably take me another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more weeks probably. 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 weeks. 6 weeks to get through the rest of the book. So time is. I may not be able to get this. If I get this done by the end of the year, it'll be a bit of a miracle. Just because my timing's been crap, and I'm probably going to have to switch these days to Fridays, just because the timing hasn't been excellent. For Saturdays, my weekends are busy. Work. Somebody's got to work weekends, and that is me. So, we'll see. Without further ado, let's get started. Let me get a quick drink of water here, and we'll get rolling. Chapter 15. Signing of Declaration of Independence went as Prof said it would. He sprang it on them at end of long day, announced a special session after dinner at which Adam Celine would speak, Adam read aloud, discussing each sentence, then read it without stopping, making music of sonorous phrases. People wept. Wyo, seated by me, was one, and I felt like it, even though I had read it earlier. Then Adam looked at them and said, "The future is waiting. Mark well what you do," and turned the meeting over to Prof rather than usual chairman. Was 2200, and fight began. Sure, they were in favor of it. News all day had been jammed with what bad boys we were, how we were to be punished, taught a lesson, so forth. Not necessary to spice it up. Stuff from Earthside was nasty. Mike merely left out, on other hand, opinions. If ever was a day when Luna felt unified, it was probably 2nd of July, 2076. So they were going to pass it. Prof knew that before he offered it. But not as written.
Honorable Chairman, in second paragraph, that word unalienable is no such word. Should be inalienable. And anyhow, wouldn't it be more dignified to say sacred rights rather than inalienable rights? I'd like to hear discussion on this.
Oh, wait. No, that wasn't the professor. I have to reread that whole thing with a new voice. I am a genius. Okay.
Honorable Chairman, in second paragraph, that word unalienable is no such word. Should be inalienable. And anyhow, wouldn't it be more dignified to say sacred rights rather than inalienable rights? I'd like to hear discussion on this.
That Choom was almost sensible, merely a literary critic, which is harmless, like dead yeast left in beer. But, well, take that woman who hated everything. She was there with List, read it aloud, and moved to have it incorporated into Declaration.
So that the peoples of Terra will know that we are civilized and fit to take our places in the councils of mankind.
Prof not only let her get away with it, he encouraged her, letting her talk when other people wanted to, then blandly put her proposal to a vote when hadn't even been seconded. Congress operated by rules they had wrangled over for days. Prof was familiar with rules, but followed them only as suited him. She was voted down in a shout and left. Then somebody stood up and said of course that long list didn't belong in Declaration. But shouldn't we have general principles? Maybe a statement that Luna Free State guaranteed freedom, equality, and security to all? Nothing elaborate, just those fundamental principles that everybody knew was proper purpose of government. True enough, and let's pass it. But must read freedom, equality, peace, and security. Right, comrade? They wrangled over whether freedom included free air, or was that part of security? Why not be on safe side and list free air by name? Move to amend to make it free air and water, because you didn't have freedom or security unless you had both air and water. Air, water, and food. Air, water, food, and cubic. Air, water, food, cubic, and heat. No, make heat read power, and you had it all covered. Everything. Cobber, have you lost your mind? That's far from everything, and what you've left out is an affront to all womankind. Step outside and say that. Let me finish. We've got to tell them right from deal that we will permit no more ships to land unless they carry at least as many women as men. At least, I said, and I for one won't chop it unless it sets immigration issue straight. Prof never lost dimples. Began to see why Prof had slept all day and was not wearing weights. Me, I was tired, having spent all day in pea suit out beyond catapult head cutting in last of relocated ballistic radars. And everybody was tired. By midnight, crowd began to thin, convinced that nothing would be accomplished that night, and bored by any yammer not their own. Was later than midnight when someone asked why this declaration was dated 4th when today was 2nd. Prof said mildly that it was July 3rd now, and it seemed unlikely that our declaration could be announced earlier than 4th, and that July 4th carried historical symbolism that might help.
Several people walked out at announcement that probably nothing would be settled until 4th of July. But I began to notice something. Hall was filling as fast as it was emptying. Finn Nielsen slid into a seat that had just been vacated. Comrade Clayton from Hong Kong showed up, pressed my shoulder, smiled at Wyo, found a seat. My youngest lieutenants, Slim and Hazel, I spotted down front, and was thinking I must alibi Hazel by telling Mum I had kept her out on party business, when was amused to see Mum herself next to them, and Sidris, and Gregg, who was supposed to be at New Catapult. Looked around and picked out a dozen more. Night editor of Lunaya Pravda, general manager of Luno Hoko, others, and each one a working comrade. Began to see that Prof had stacked deck. That Congress had never had a fixed membership. These dinkum comrades had as much right to show up as those who had been talking a month. Now they sat and voted down amendments. About 300, when I was wondering how much more I could take, someone brought a note to Prof. He read it, banged gavel, and said, "Adam Celine begs your indulgence. Do I hear unanimous consent?" So screen back of rostrum lighted up again, and Adam told them that he had been following debate and was warmed by many thoughtful and constructive criticisms. But could he make a suggestion? Why not admit that any piece of writing was imperfect? If this declaration was, in general, what they wanted, why not postpone perfection for another day and pass this as it stands? Honorable Chairman, I so move. They passed it with a yell. Prof said, "Do I hear objection?" and waited with gavel raised. A man who had been talking when Adam had asked to be heard said, "Well, I still say that's a dangling participle, but okay, leave it in." Prof banged gavel. "So ordered." Then we filed up and put our chops on a big scroll that had been "sent over from Adam's office," and I noticed Adam's chop on it. I signed right under Hazel. Child now could write, although was still short on book learning. Her chop was shaky, but she wrote it large and proud. Comrade Clayton signed his party name, real name in letters, and Japanese chop, 3 little pictures, one above other. 2 comrades chopped with X's and had them witnessed. All party leaders were there that night, morning. All chopped it, and not more than a dozen yammerers stuck. But those who did put their chops down for history to read, and thereby committed, quote, "their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors," unquote. While Q was moving slowly past and people were talking, Prof banged for attention.
"I ask for volunteers for a dangerous mission. This declaration will go on the news channels, but must be presented in person to the Federated Nations on Terra."
That put a stop to noise. Prof was looking at me. I swallowed and said, "I volunteer." Wyo echoed,
"So do I."
and little Hazel Mead said,
"Me too."
In moments were a dozen, from Finn Nielsen to Господин Dangling Participle. Turned out to be good cobber aside from his fetish. Prof took names, murmured something about getting in touch as transportation became available. I got Prof aside and said, "Look, Prof, you too tired to track? You know ship for 7th was cancelled. Now they're talking about slapping embargo on us. Next ship they lift for Luna will be a warship. How are you planning to travel? As prisoner?"
"Oh, we won't use their ships."
"So? Going to build one? Any idea how long that takes? If could build one at all, which I doubt."
"Manuel, Mike says it's necessary, and has it all worked out."
I did know Mike was necessary. He had rerun problem soon as we learned that bright laddies at Richardson had snuck one home. He now gave us only one chance in 53. with imperative need for Prof to go Earthside. But I'm not one to worry about impossibilities. I'd spent day working to make that one chance in 53 turn up.
Mike will provide the ship, Prof went on. He has completed its design and it is being worked on.
He has? It is? Since when is Mike engineer?
Isn't he?
Asked Prof. I started to answer. Shut up. Mike had no degrees, simply knew more engineering than any man alive. What about Shakespeare's plays, or riddles, or history? Name it. Tell me more.
Manuel, we'll go to Terra as a load of grain.
What? Who's we?
You and myself. The other volunteers are merely decorative.
I said, look, Prof, I've stuck. Worked hard when whole thing seemed silly. Worn these weights. Got 'em on now. On chance I might have to go on that dreadful place. But contracted to go in a ship with at least a cyborg pilot to help me get down safely. Did not agree to go as meteorite.
He said, Very well, Manuel. I believe in free choice, always. Your alternate will go.
My who?
Comrade Wyoming. So far as I know, she's the only other person in training for the trip, other than a few Terrans.
So I went, but talked to Mike first. He said patiently,
Man, my first friend, there isn't a thing to worry about. You are scheduled load KM-187 Series 76, and you'll arrive in Bombay with no trouble. But to be sure, to reassure you, I selected that barge because it will be taken out of parking orbit and landed when India is faced toward me. And I've added an override so that I can take you away from ground control if I don't like the way they handle you. Trust me, man, it has all been thought through. Even the decision to continue shipments when security was broken was part of this plan.
might have told me.
There was no need to worry you. Professor had to know, and I've kept in touch with him. But you are going simply to take care of him and back him up. Do his job if he dies, a factor on which I can give you no reassurance.
I sighed. Okay, but Mike, surely you don't think you can pilot a barge into a soft landing at this distance? Speed of light alone would trip you.
Man, don't you think I understand ballistics? For the orbital position, then, from query through reply, then to command received is under 4 seconds, and you can rely on me to not waste microseconds. Your maximum parking orbit travel in 4 seconds is only 32 kilometers, diminishing asymptotically to 0 at landing. My reflex time will be effectively less than that of a pilot in a manual landing because I don't waste time grasping a situation and deciding on correct action. So my maximum is 4 seconds. But my effective reflex time is much less, as I project and predict constantly, see ahead, program it out. In effect, I'll stay 4 seconds ahead of you in your trajectory and respond instantly.
That steel can doesn't even have an altimeter.
It does now. Man, please believe me. I've thought of everything. The only reason I've ordered this extra equipment is to reassure you. Pune ground control hasn't made a bobble in the last 5,000 loads. For a computer, it's fairly bright.
Okay. Mike, how hard do they splash those bleeding barges? What G?
Not high, man. 10 gravities at injection, then that programs down to a steady, soft 4 Gs. Then you'll be nudged again between 6 and 5 Gs just before splash. The splash itself is gentle, equal to a fall of 50 meters, and you enter Ogive first with no sudden shock, less than 3 Gs. Then you surface and splash again, lightly, and simply float at 1 G. Man, those barge shells are built as lightly as possible for economy's sake. We can't afford to toss them around, or they would split their seams.
How sweet. Mike, what would 5 to 6 Gs do to you? Split your seams?
I conjecture that I was subjected to about 6 gravities when they shipped me up here. 6 gravities in my present condition would shear many of my essential connections. However, I'm more interested in the extremely high transient accelerations I'm going to experience from shock waves when Terra starts bombing us. Data are insufficient for prediction, but I may lose control of my outlying functions, man. This could be a major factor in any tactical situation.
Mike, do you really think they are going to bomb us?
Count on it, ma'am. That's why this trip is so important.
Left it at that, and went out to see this coffin. Should have stayed home. Ever looked at one of those silly barges? Just a steel cylinder with retro and guidance rockets and radar transponder. Resembles a spaceship where a pair of pliers resembles my number 3. I just trampled all over that. Resembles a spaceship the way a pair of pliers resembles my number 3 arm. They had this one cut open and were outfitting our living quarters. No galley, no WC, no nothing. Why bother? We were going to be in it only 50 hours. Start empty so that you won't need a honey sack in your suit. Dispense with lounge and bar. You'll never be out of your suit. You'll be drugged and not caring. At least Prof would be drugged almost whole time. I had to be alert at landing to try and get us out of this death trap if something went wrong and nobody came along with a tin opener. They were building a shaped cradle in which backs of our pea suits would fit. We would be strapped into these holes and stay there, clear to Terra. They seemed more concerned about making total mass equal to displaced wheat and same center of gravity and all moment arms adding up correctly than they did about our comfort. Engineer in charge told me that even padding to be added inside our pea suits was figured in. Was glad to learn we were going to have padding. Those holes did not look soft. Returned home in thoughtful condition. Wyo was not at dinner. Unusual. Gregg was more unusual. Nobody said anything about my being scheduled to imitate a falling rock next day, although all knew. But did not realize anything special was on until all next generation left table without being told. Then knew why Gregg had not gone back to Mare Undarum site after Congress adjourned that morning. Somebody had asked for a family talk.
Mum looked around and said, "We're all here. Alice, shut that door, that's a dear. Grandpa, will you start us?"
Our senior husband stopped nodding over coffee and firmed up. He looked down table and said strongly,
I can see that we are all here. I see that children have been put to bed. I see that there is no stranger, no guest. I say that we are met in accordance with customs created by Black Jack Davis, our first husband, and Tilly, our first wife. If there is any matter that concerns safety and happiness of our marriage, haul it out in the light now. Don't let it fester. This is our custom.
Grandpa turned to Mum and said softly, Take it, Mimi, and slumped back into gentle apathy. But for a minute he had been strong, handsome, virile, dynamic man of days of my opting, and I thought with sudden tears how lucky I had been. Then didn't know whether I felt lucky or not. Only excuse I could see for a family talk was the fact that I was due to be shipped earthside next day, labeled as grain. Could Mum be thinking of trying to set family against it? Nobody had to abide by results of a talk, but one always did. That was strength of our marriage. When came down to issues, we stood together. Mimi was saying.
Does anyone have anything that needs to be discussed? Speak up, dears.
Gregg said, I have.
We'll listen to Gregg.
Gregg is a good speaker, can stand up in front of a congregation and speak with confidence about matters I don't feel confident about even when alone. But that night he seemed anything but sure of himself.
Well, we've always tried to keep this marriage in balance. Some old, some young, regular alternation. Well spaced, just as it was handed down to us. But we've varied sometimes, for good reason.
He looked at Ludmilla, and adjusted it later. He looked again at far end of table, at Frank and Ali, on each side of Ludmilla.
Over years, as you can see from records, average age of husbands has been about 40, wives about 35, and that age spread was just what our marriages started out with, nearly 100 years gone by, for Tilly was 15 when she opted blackjack, and he had just turned 20. Right now, I find that average age of husbands is almost exactly 40, while an average.
Mum said firmly,
Never mind arithmetic, Gregg dear. Simply state it.
I was trying to think who Gregg could possibly mean. True, I had been much away during past year, and if did get home, was often after everybody was asleep. But he was clearly talking about marriage, and nobody ever proposes another wedding in our marriage without first giving everybody a long, careful chance to look prospect over. You just didn't do it any other way. So I'm stupid. Gregg stuttered and said,
I propose Wyoming not.
I said I was stupid. I understand machinery, and machinery understands me, but didn't claim to know anything about people. When I get to be senior husband, if I live that long, I'm going to do exactly what Grandpa does with Mum. Let Sidris run it. Just same. Well, look, Wyo joined Gregg's church. I like Gregg, love Gregg, and admire him. But you could never feed theology of his church through a computer and get anything but no. Wyo surely knew this, since she encountered it in adult years. Truthfully, I had suspected that Wyo's conversion was proof that she would do anything for our cause. But Wyo had recruited Gregg even earlier, and had made most of trips out to new site, easier for her to get away than me or Prof. Ah well, was taken by surprise. Should not have been. Mimi said,
Gregg, do you have reason to think that Wyoming would accept an opting from us?
Yes.
Very well. We all know Wyoming. I'm sure we formed our opinions of her. I see no reason to discuss it. Unless someone has something to say, speak up.
was no surprise to Mum, but wouldn't be, nor to anyone else either, since Mum never let a talk take place until she was sure of outcome. But wondered why Mum was sure of my opinion, so certain that she had not felt me out ahead of time, and sat there in a soggy quandary, knowing I should speak up, knowing I knew something terribly pertinent which nobody else knew, or matter would never have gone this far. Something that didn't matter to me, but would matter to Mum and all our women. Sat there, miserable coward, and said nothing. Mum said,
Very well. Let's call the roll. Ludmilla? Me? Why, I love Wyo. Everybody knows that. Sure. Lenore, dear.
Well, I may try to talk her into going back to being a brownie again. I think we set each other off. But that's her only fault, being blonder than I am. Da.
Sidris?
Thumbs up. Wyo is our kind of people.
Anna? I've something to say before I express my opinion, Mimi. I don't think that's necessary, dear. Nevertheless, I'm going to haul it out in the open, just as Tilly always did according to our traditions. In this marriage, every wife has carried her load, given children to the family. It may come as a surprise to some of you to learn that Wyo has had 8 children.
certainly surprised. Ali, his head jerked and jaw dropped. I stared at plate. Oh, Wyo, Wyo. How could I let this happen? Was going to have to speak up. And realized Anna was still speaking.
So now she can have children of her own. The operation was successful, but she worries about possibility of another defective baby, unlikely as that is, according to the head of the clinic in Hong Kong. So we'll just have to love her enough to make her quit fretting. We will love her, Mum said serenely. We do love her. Anna, are you ready to express opinion? Hardly necessary, is it? I went to Hong Kong with her, held her hand while her tubes were restored. I opt Wyo. In this family, Mum went on, we have always felt that our husbands should be allowed a veto. Odd of us, perhaps, but Tilly started it, and it has always worked well. Well, Grandpa?
Eh? What were you saying, my dear?
We are opting Wyoming, Господин Grandpa. Do you give consent?
What? Why, of course, of course. Very nice girl. Say, whatever became of that pretty little afro, named something like that? She get mad at us?
Gregg?
I proposed it.
Manuel, do you forbid this?
Me? Why, you know me, Mum.
I do. So I sometimes wonder if you know you. Hans?
What would happen if I said no?
You'd lose some teeth, that's what, Lenore said promptly. Hans votes yes. Stop it, darlings, Mum said with soft reproof. Opting is a serious matter. Hans, speak up.
Da, yes, ja, we, see. High time we had a pretty blonde in this. Ouch!
Stop it, Lenore. Frank?
Yes, Mum.
Ollie, dear, is it unanimous?
Lad blushed bright. Lad blushed bright pink and couldn't talk. Nodded vigorously. Instead of appointing a husband and wife to seek out selectee and propose opting for us, Mum sent Ludmilla and Anna to fetch Wyo at once, and turned out she was only as far away as Bon Ton. Nor was that only irregularity. Instead of setting a date and arranging a wedding party, our children were called in, and 20 minutes later Gregg had his book open and we did be taking vows. And I finally got it through my confused head that was being done with breakneck speed because of my date to break my neck next day. Not that it could matter, save as symbol as my save as symbol of my family's love for me, since a bride spent her first night with her senior husband, and second night and third I was going to spend out in space. But did matter anyhow, and when women started to cry during ceremony, I found self dripping tears right with them. Then I went to bed, alone in workshop, once the Wyo had kissed us and left on Grandpa's arm. Was terribly tired, and last 2 days had been hard. Thought about exercises and decided it was too late to matter. Thought about calling Mike and asked him for news from Terra. Went to bed. Don't know how long had been asleep when realized was no longer asleep and somebody was in room.
Manuel?
Came soft whisper in dark. Huh? Wyo? You weren't supposed to be here, dear.
I am indeed supposed to be here, my husband. Mum knows I'm here, so does Gregg. And Grandpa went right to sleep.
Oh, what time is it?
About 400. Please, dear, may I come to bed?
What? Oh, certainly. Something I should remember. Oh, yes. Mike,
Yes, man, he answered.
switch off. Don't listen. If you want me, call me on family phone.
So Wyo told me, man. Congratulations.
Then her head was pillowed on my stump, and I put right arm around her. What are you crying about, Wyo?
I'm not crying. I'm just frightened silly that you won't come back.
Oi, let me tell you, the voice hopping is not as easy as I make it not sound.
I make it sound hard? Well, it's 3 times harder. You gotta be a champ.
or have really questionable thoughts about what books you should read aloud in front of the entire internet. Like me! Well, hey, it could be worse. I could be trying to read Dune and do it justice. Things I will probably never do as much as I would like to. Trust me, I love Dune. It's probably like my favorite book ever, but you won't catch me reading it aloud uh, on this stream, probably ever. Because that's one that I would only want to do justice, and I don't think I could unless I rehearsed, and that's never happening. Combination of being too lazy and then not talented enough. I could probably do it. I could probably do it. I just have to come up with individual voices for Paul Atreides, Leto Atreides, Liet Kynes, Rebecca, Jessica, sorry, the Emperor, all the Harkonnens. Call it 4 Harkonnens, since you've got to do Piter de Vries. Oh yeah, I'd have to do Thufir Hawat. I'd have to do Gurney Halleck. I'd have to do, yeah. So that's a lot of voices, and I'd want them all to be distinct. I'd have to do more Fremen than I care to count and name. I'd have to learn how to do the Susu Suk call. Yeah, so it'd be kind of tricky. All right, that was chapter 15. How long is chapter 16? Chapter 16 is a little longer, so we will see. I don't think I'm going to keep doing the Russian voice, though, because that is really wearing out parts of my jaw. And tongue. Certain face muscles in order to make that accent happen. And this is not being done under ideal circumstances. This is all live. This is not pre-recorded. What you hear is what you got. Well, actually, if you're listening to this after the fact, I guess technically it is pre-recorded, but I don't rehearse these, is my point. And I lost my page. I flipped ahead. And it has come to bite me. Okay, there we go. Chapter 16. Woke up scared silly in pitch darkness. Manuel! Didn't know which end was up. Manuel! It called again. Wake up! That brought me out some. Was signal intended to trigger me. Recalled being stretched on a table in infirmary at Complex, staring up at a light and listening to a voice while a drug dripped into my veins. But was 100 years ago. Endless time of nightmares. Unendurable pressure. Pain. Knew now what no end is up feeling was. Had experienced before. Free fall. Was in space. What had gone wrong? Had Mike dropped a decimal point? Or had he given in to childish nature and played a joke, not realizing would kill? Then why, after all years of pain, was I alive? Or was I? Was this normal way for Ghost to feel? Just lonely, lost, nowhere? Wake up, Manuel! Wake up, Manuel! Oh, shut up! I snarled. Put on your filthy keg and ace! Recording went on. I paid no attention. Where was that reeking light switch? No, doesn't take a century of pain to accelerate to Luna's escape speed at 3 gravities. Merely feels so. 82 seconds. But is one time when human nervous system feels every microsecond. 3 Gs is 18 grim times as much as a loony ought to weigh. Then discovered those vacuum skulls had not put arm back on. For some silly reason they had taken it off when they stripped me to prepare me, and I was loaded with enough don't worry and let sleep pills not to protest. No hoo-hoo had they put it on again. but that Drecklich switch was on my left and sleeve of pea suit was empty. Spent next 10 years getting unstrapped with one hand, then a 20-year sentence floating around in dark before managed to find my cradle again. Figure out which was head end, and from that hint locate switch by touch. That compartment was not over 2 meters in any dimension. This turns out to be larger than Old Dome in freefall and total darkness. Found it. We had light. And don't ask why that coffin did not have at least 3 lighting systems all working at all time. Habit, probably. A lighting system implies a switch to control it, and yet thing was built in 2 days. Should be thankful switch worked. Once I had light, cubic shrank to true claustrophobic dimensions, and 10% smaller, and I took a look at Prof. Dead, apparently. Well, he had every excuse. Envied him, but was now supposed to check his pulse and breathing and such like in case he had been unlucky and still had such troubles. And was again hampered, and not just by being one-armed. Grain load had been dried and depressurized as usual before loading, but that cell was supposed to be pressured. Oh, nothing fancy, just a tank with air in it. Our pea suits were supposed to handle needs such as life's breath for those 2 days. But even best pea suit is more comfortable in pressure than in vacuum, and, anyhow, I was supposed to be able to get at my patient. Could not. Didn't need to open helmet to know this steel can had not stayed gas tight. Knew at once, naturally, from way pea suit felt. Oh, drugs I had for Prof, heart stimulants and so forth, were in field ampoules. Could jab them through his suit. But how to check heart and breathing? His suit was cheapest sort, sold for a loony who rarely leaves Warren. Had no readouts. His mouth hung open and eyes stared. A deader, I decided. No need to ex-prof beyond that old Lyman. Had eliminated himself. Tried to see pulse on throat. His helmet was in way. They had provided the program clock, which was mighty kind of them. Showed I had been out 44 plus hours, all to plan, and in 3 hours we should receive horrible booting to place us in parking orbit around Terra. Then, after 2 circums, call it 3 more hours, we should start injection into landing program, if Puna ground control didn't change its feeble mind and leave us in orbit. Remind itself that was unlikely. Grain is not left in vacuum longer than necessary. Has tendency to become puffed wheat or popped corn, which not only lowers value, but can split those thin canisters like a melon. Wouldn't that be sweet? Why'd they pack this in with grain? Why not just a load of rock and doesn't mind vacuum? Had time to think about that, and to become very thirsty. Took nipple for half a mouthful, no more, because certainly did not want to take 6 Gs with a full bladder. Need not have worried. Was equipped with catheter, but did not know. When time got short, I decided I couldn't hurt Prof to give him a jolt of drug that was supposed to take him through heavy acceleration. Then, after in parking orbit, give him his heart stimulant, since didn't seem as if anything could hurt him. Gave him first drug, then spent rest of minutes struggling back into straps, one-handed. Was sorry I didn't know name of my helpful friend. Could have cursed him better. 10 Gs gets you into parking orbit around Terra in a mere 3.26 times 10 to the 7th microseconds. Merely seems longer, 10 gravities being 60 times what a fragile sack of protoplasm should be asked to endure. Call it 33 seconds. My truthful word, I suspect my ancestress in Salem spent a worse half-minute day they made her dance. Gave Prof heart stimulant, then spent 3 hours trying to decide whether to drug self as well as Prof for landing sequence. Decided against. All drug had done for me at catapulting had been to swap a minute and a half of misery and 2 days of boredom for a century of terrible dreams. And besides, if those last minutes were going to be my very last, I decided to experience them. Bad as they would be, they were my very own, and I would not give them up. They were bad. 6 Gs did not feel better than 10, felt worse. 4 Gs, no relief. Then we were kicked harder. Then, suddenly, just for seconds, in free fall again. Then came Splash, which was not gentle, and which we took on straps, not pads, as we went in head first. Also, don't think Mike realized that, after diving in hard, we would then surface and splash hard again before we damped down into floating. Earthworms call it floating, but is nothing like floating in free fall. You do it at 1 G, 6 times what is decent, and odd side motions tacked on. Very odd motions. Mike had assured us that solar weather was good, no radiation danger inside that Iron Maiden. But he had not been so interested in Earthside Indian Ocean weather. Prediction was acceptable for landing barges, and suppose he felt that was good enough. And I would have thought so too. Stomach was supposed to be empty, but I filled helmet with sourest, nastiest fluid you would ever go a long way to avoid. Then we turned completely over, and I got it in hair and eyes and some in nose. This is thing earthworms call seasickness, and is one of many horrors they take for granted. Won't go into long period during which we were towed into port. Let it stand that, in addition to seasickness, my air bottles were playing out. They were rated for 12 hours, plenty for a 50-hour orbit, most of which I was unconscious and none involving heavy exercise, but not quite enough with some hours of towing added. By time barge finally held still, I was almost too dopey to care about trying to break out. Except for one fact. We were picked up, I think, and tumbled a bit, and then brought to rest with me upside down. This is a no good position at best under 1 gravity. Simply impossible when supposed to A. Unstrap self, B. Get out of suit-shaped cavity, C. Get loose a sledgehammer fastened with butterfly nuts to bulkhead, D. Smash same against breakaways guarding escape hatch, E. Batter way out, and F. Finally, drag an old man in a pea suit out after you. Didn't finish step A. Passed out head downwards. Lucky this was emergency last resort routine. Stu LaJoy had been notified before we left. News services had been warned shortly before we landed. I woke up with people leaning over me. Passed out again. Woke up second time in hospital bed. Flat on back with heavy feeling in chest. Was heavy and weak all over. But not ill, just tired, bruised, hungry, thirsty, languid. Was a transparent plastic tent over bed, which accounted for fact I was having no trouble breathing. At once was closed in on from both sides. A tiny Hindu nurse with big eyes on one side, Stuart LaJoy on other. He grinned at me. "Hi, Cobber. How do you feel?" I'm right, but oh bloody, what a way to travel." "Prof says it's the only way. What a tough old boy he is." "Hold it. Prof said? Prof is dead." "Not at all. Not in good shape. We've got him in a pneumatic bed with a round-the-clock watch and more instruments wired into him than would you believe. But he's alive and will be able to do his job. But truly, he didn't mind the trip. He never knew about it, so he says. Went to sleep in one hospital, woke up in another. I thought he was wrong when he refused to let me wrangle it to send a ship, but he was not. The publicity has been tremendous." I said slowly, "You say Prof refused to let you send a ship?" "I should say Chairman Celine refused. Didn't you see the dispatches, Manny? No. Too late to fight over it, but the last few days have been busy. A dinkum word. Here, too. Don't recall when last I dosed. You sound like a loony. I am a loony, Manny. Don't ever doubt it. But the sister is looking daggers at me. Stu picked her up, turned her around. I decided he wasn't all loony yet, but Nurse didn't resent. Go play somewhere else, dear, and I'll give your patient back to you. I will give your patient back to you, still warm, in a few minutes. He shut a door on her and came back to bed. But Adam was right. This was not only wonderful publicity, but safer. Publicity, I suppose, but safer? Let's not talk about. Safer, my old? You weren't shot at? Yet they had 2 hours in which they knew right away where you were, a big fat target. They couldn't make up their minds what to do. They haven't formed a policy yet. They didn't even dare not bring you down on schedule. The news was full of it. I had stories slanted and waiting. Now they don't dare touch you. You're popular heroes. Whereas if I had waited to charter a ship and fetch you, well, I don't know. We probably would have been ordered into parking orbit. Then you two, and myself perhaps, would have been taken off under arrest. No skipper is going to risk missiles no matter how much he's paid. The proof of the pudding, Cobber. But let me brief you. You're both citizens of the People's Directorate of Chad. Best I could do on short notice. Also, Chad has recognized Luna. I had to buy one prime minister, 2 generals, some tribal chiefs, and a minister of finance. Cheap for such a hurry-up job. I haven't been able to get you diplomatic immunity, but I hope to, before you leave hospital. At present, they haven't even dared arrest you. They can't figure out what you've done. They have guards outside, but simply for your protection. And a good thing, or you would have reporters 9 deep shoving microphones into your face. Just what have we done? That they know about, I mean. Illegal immigration? Not even that, Manny. You never were a consignee, and you have derivative Pan-African citizenship through one of your grandfathers. No hoo-hoo. In Professor de la Paz's case, we dug up proof that he had been granted naturalized Chad citizenship 40 years back, waited for the ink to dry, and used it. You're not even illegally entered here in India. Not only did they bring you down themselves, knowing that you were in that barge, but also a control officer very kindly and fairly cheaply stamped your virgin passports. In addition to that, Prof's exile has no legal existence as the government that proscribed him no longer exists, and a competent court has taken notice. That was more expensive. Nurse came back in, indignant as a mother cat. Lord Stewart, you must let my patient rest. At once, ma chérie. Your Lord Stewart should be Comte. Or I can lay a dubious claim to being the MacGregor. The blue blood bit helps. These people haven't been happy since they took their royalty away from them. As he left, he patted her rump. Instead of screaming, she wiggled it, was smiling as she came over to me. Stu was going to have to watch that stuff when he went back to Luna. If he did. She asked how I felt. Told her I was right, just hungry. Sister, did you see some prosthetic arms in our luggage? She had, and I felt better with number 6 in place. Had selected it and number 2 and social arm as enough for trip. Number 2 was presumably still in complex. I hoped somebody was taking care of it. But number 6 is most all around useful arm. With it and social one, I'd be okay. Sorry about changing accents on Stu LaJoy there. I can't do a French accent to save my life. Plus, he's not exactly French anyway. He's just kind of a posh git who happens to be very posh indeed. 2 days later, we left for Agra to present credentials to Federated Nations. I was in bad shape, and not just high G. Could do well enough in a wheelchair, and could even walk a little, although did not in public. What I had was a sore throat that missed pneumonia only through drugs. Traveler's trots, skin disease on hands and spreading to feet. Just like my other trips to that disease-ridden hole, Terra. We loonies don't know how lucky we are, living in a place that has tightest of quarantines, almost no vermin, and what we have controlled by vacuum anytime necessary. Or unlucky, since we have almost no immunities if turns out we need them. Still, wouldn't swap. Never heard word venereal until first went earthside and had thought common cold was state of ice miners' feet. And wasn't cheerful for other reason. Stu had fetched us a message from Adam Celine. Buried in it, concealed even from Stu, was news that chances had dropped to worse than 1 in 100. Wondered what point in risking crazy trip if made odds worse. Did Mike really know what chances were? Couldn't see any way he could compute them, no matter how many facts he had. But Prof didn't seem worried. He talked to platoons of reporters, smiled at endless pictures, gave out statements telling world he placed great confidence in Federated Nations and was sure our just claims would be recognized, and that he wanted to thank Friends of Free Luna for wonderful help in bringing true story of our small but sturdy nation before good people of Terra. F of FL being Stu, a professional public opinion firm, several thousand chronic petition signers, and a great stack of Hong Kong dollars. I had picture taken too, and tried to smile, but dodged questions by pointing to throat and croaking. In Agra, we were lodged in a lavish suite in a hotel that had once been a palace of a Mahar... Let's try that again. I know how to pronounce Maharaja, I swear. In Agra, we were lodged in a lavish suite in a hotel that had once been palace of a Maharaja, and still belonged to him, even though India is supposed to be socialist. And interviews and picture-taking went on. Hardly dared get out of wheelchair even to visit WC, as was under orders from Prof never to be photographed vertically. He was always either in bed or in a stretcher. Bed, baths, bedpans, everything. Not only because safer, considering age, and easier for any loony, but also for pictures. His dimples and wonderful, gentle, persuasive personality were displayed in hundreds of millions of video screens, endless news pictures. But his personality did not get us anywhere in Agra. Prof was carried to office of President of Grand Assembly, me being pushed alongside, and there he attempted to present his credentials as ambassador to FN and prospective senator for Luna. Was referred to Secretary General, and at his offices we were granted 10 minutes with Assistant Secretary, who sucked teeth and said he could accept our credentials without prejudice and without implied commitment. They were referred to Credentials Committee, who sat on them. I got fidgety. Prof read Keats. Grain barges continued to arrive in Bombay. At Bombay. In a way, was not sorry about latter. When we flew from Bombay to Agra, we got up before dawn and were taken out to field as city was waking. Every loony has his hole, whether luxury of a long-established home like Davis Tunnels or rock still raw from drill. Cubic is no problem, and can't be for centuries. Bombay was bee-swarms of people. Are over million, was told, who have no home but some piece of pavement. A family might claim right, and hand down by will, generation after generation, to sleep on a piece 2 meters long and 1 wide at a described location in front of a shop. Entire family sleeps on that space, meaning father, mother, kids, maybe a grandmother. Would not have believed if had not seen.
At dawn in Bombay roadways, side pavements, even bridges are covered with tight carpet of human bodies. What do they do? Where do they work? How do they eat? Did not look as if they did. Could count ribs. If I hadn't believed simple arithmetic that you can't ship stuff downhill forever without shipping replacement back, would have tossed in cards. But Tanstoffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, in Bombay or in Luna. At last we were given appointment with an investigating committee. Not what Prof had asked for. He had requested public hearing before Senate, complete with video cameras. Only camera at this session was its in-camera nature, was closed. Not too closed, I had a little recorder, but no video. And took Prof 2 minutes to discover that committee was actually VIPs of Lunar Authority or their tame dogs. Nevertheless, was chance to talk, and Prof treated them as if they had power to recognize Luna's independence and willingness to do so, while they treated us as a cross between naughty children and criminals up for sentencing. Prof was allowed to make opening statement. Prof was allowed to make opening statement. With decorations trimmed away was assertion that Luna was de facto a sovereign state, with an unopposed government in being, a civil condition of peace and order, a provisional president, and cabinet carrying on necessary functions but anxious to return to private life as soon as Congress completed writing a constitution, and that we were here to ask that these facts be recognized de jure, and that Luna be allowed to take her rightful place in councils of mankind as a member of federated nations. What Prof told them bore a speaking acquaintance with truth, and they were not where they could spot discrepancies. Our provisional president was a computer, and cabinet was Wyo, Finn, Comrade Clayton, and Terence Sheehan, editor of Pravda, plus Wolfgang Korsakov, board chairman of Luno Hoko, and a director of Bank of Hong Kong in Luna. But Wyo was only person now in Luna who knew that Adam Celine was false face for a computer. She had been terribly nervous at being left to hold fort alone. As it was, Adam's oddity in never being seen save over video was always an embarrassment. We had done our best to turn it into a security necessity by opening offices for him in cubic of Authority's Luna City office and then exploding a small bomb. After this assassination attempt, comrades who had been most fretful about Adam's failure to stir around became loudest in demands that Adam must not take any chances, this being helped by editorials. But I wondered while Prof was talking what these pompous chooms would think if they knew that our president was a collection of hardware owned by Authority. But they just sat staring with chill disapproval, unmoved by Prof's rhetoric. Probably best performance of his life, considering he delivered it flat on back, speaking into a microphone without notes and hardly able to see his audience. Then they started in on us. Gentleman member from Argentina, never given their names, we weren't socially acceptable. This Argentino objected to phrase former warden in Prof's speech. That designation had been obsolete half a century. He insisted that it be struck out and proper title inserted. Protector of the lunar colonies by appointment of the Lunar Authority. Any other wording offended dignity of Lunar Authority. Prof asked to comment. Honorable Chairman permitted it. Prof said mildly that he accepted change since Authority was free to designate its servants in any fashion it pleased, and was no intention to offend dignity of any agency of federated nations. But, in view of functions of this office, former functions of this former office,
former functions of this former office, there we go, citizens of Luna Free State would probably go on thinking of it by traditional name. That made about 6 of them try to talk at once. Somebody objected to use of word Luna, and still more to Luna Free State. It was the moon, Earth's moon, a satellite of Earth and property of federated nations, just as Antarctica was, and these proceedings were a farce. Was inclined to agree with last point. Chairman asked gentleman member from North America to please be in order and to address his remarks through chair. Did Chair understand from witness's last remark that this alleged de facto regime intended to interfere with consignee system? Prof fielded that and tossed it back. Honorable Chairman, I myself was a consignee. Now Luna is my beloved home. My colleague, the Honorable, oh my God, what on earth? The Honorable Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs, Colonel O'Kelly Davis, myself, is Luna born, and proud of his descent from 4 transported grandparents. Luna has grown strong on your outcasts. Give us your poor, your wretched. We welcome them. Luna has room for them, nearly 40 million square kilometers, an area greater than all Africa, and almost totally empty. More than that, since by our method of living we occupy not area, but cubic. The mind cannot imagine the day when Luna would refuse another shipload of weary homeless. Chairman said,
The witness is admonished to refrain from making speeches. The chair takes it that your oratory means that the group you represent agrees to accept prisoners as before.
No, sir.
What? Explain yourself.
Once an immigrant sets foot on Luna today, he is a free man, no matter what his previous condition, free to go where he listeth.
So? Then what's to keep a consignee from walking across the field, climbing into another ship, and returning here? I admit that I am puzzled at your apparent willingness to accept them. But we do not want them. It is our humane way of getting rid of incorrigibles who would otherwise have to be executed.
Could have told him several things that would stop what he pictured. He had obviously never been to Luna. As for incorrigibles, if really are, Luna eliminates such faster than Terra ever did. Back when I was very young, they sent us a gangster lord, from Los Angeles, I believe. He arrived with a squad of stooges, his bodyguards, and was cockily ready to take over Luna, as was rumored to have taken over a prison somewhere Earthside. None lasted 2 weeks. Gangster boss didn't make it to barracks, hadn't listened when told how to wear a pea suit.
There is nothing to keep him from going home, so far as we are concerned, sir, Prof answered, although your police here on Terra might cause him to think. But I've never heard of a consignee arriving with funds enough to buy a ticket home. Is this truly an issue? The ships are yours. Luna has no ships. And let me add that we are sorry that the ship scheduled for Luna this month was cancelled. I am not complaining that it forced on my colleague and myself, Prof stopped to smile, a most informal method of travel. I simply hope that this does not represent policy. Luna has no quarrel with you. Your ships are welcome. Your trade is welcome. We are at peace and wish to stay so. Please note that all scheduled grain shipments have come through on time.
Prof did always have a gift for changing subject. They fiddled with minor matters then. Nosy from North America wanted to know what had really happened to the ward. He stopped himself. The protector, Senator Hobart. Prof answered that he had suffered a stroke. A coup is a stroke. And was no longer able to carry out his duties, but was in good health otherwise and receiving constant medical care. Prof added thoughtfully that he suspected that the old gentleman had been failing for some time, in view of his indiscretions this past year. especially his many invasions of rights of free citizens, including ones who were not and never had been consignees. Story was not hard to swallow. When those busy scientists managed to break news of our coup, they had reported Warden as dead, whereas Mike had kept him alive and on job by impersonating him. When Authority Earthside demanded a report from Warden on this wild rumor, Mike had consulted Prof, then had accepted call and given a convincing imitation of senility, managing to deny, confirm, and confuse every detail. Our announcements followed, and thereafter Warden was no longer available even in his computer alter ego. 3 days later, we declared independence. This North American wanted to know what reason they had to believe that one word of this was true. Whoops. Prof smiled most saintly smile and made effort to spread thin hands before letting them fall to coverlet. The gentleman member from North America is urged to go to Luna, visit Senator Hobart's sickbed, and see for himself. Indeed, all Terran citizens are invited to visit Luna any time, see anything. We wish to be friends. We are at peace. We have nothing to hide. My only regret is that my country is unable to furnish transportation. For that, we must turn to you. Chinese member looked at Prof thoughtfully. He had not said a word, but missed nothing. Chairman recessed hearing until 1500. They gave us a retiring room and sent in lunch. I wanted to talk, but Prof shook head, glanced around room, tapped ear. So I shut up. Prof napped then, and I leveled out my wheelchair and joined him. On Terra, we both slept all we could. Helped. Not enough. They didn't wheel us back in until 1600. Committee was already sitting. Chairman then broke own rule against speeches, and made a long one more in sorrow than anger. Started by reminding us that Luna Authority was a non-political trusteeship charged with solemn duty of ensuring that Earth satellite the Moon, Luna as some called it, was never used for military purposes. He told us that Authority had guarded this sacred trust more than a century, while governments fell and new governments rose, alliances shifted and shifted again. Indeed, Authority was older than federated nations, deriving original charter from an older international body, and so well had it kept that trust that it had lasted through wars and turmoils and realignments. This is news, but you see what he was building towards. The Lunar Authority cannot surrender its trust, he told us solemnly. However, there appears to be no insuperable obstacle to the lunar colonists, if they show political maturity, enjoying a degree of autonomy. This can be taken under advisement. Much depends on your behavior. The behavior, I should say, of all you colonists. There have been riots and destruction of property. This must not be. I waited for him to mention 90 dead goons. He never did. I will never make a statesman. I don't have a high-level approach. Destroyed property must be paid for, he went on. Commitments must be met. If this body you call a Congress can guarantee such things, it appears to this committee that this so-called Congress could in time be considered an agency of the Authority for many internal matters. Indeed, it is conceivable that a stable local government might, in time, assume many duties now falling on the Protector, and even be allowed a delegate, non-voting, in the Grand Assembly. But such recognition would have to be earned. But one thing must be made clear. Earth's major satellite, the Moon, is by nature's law forever the joint property of all the peoples of Earth. It does not belong to that handful who by accident of history happen to live there. The sacred trust laid upon the Lunar Authority is and forever must be the supreme law of Earth's moon. Accident of history, huh? I expected Prof to shove it down his throat. I thought he would say... No, never did know what Prof would say. Here's what he did say. Prof waited through several seconds of silence, then said,
Honorable Chairman, who is to be exiled this time?
What did you say?
Have you decided which one of you is to go into exile? Your deputy warden won't take the job.
this was true. He preferred to stay alive.
He is functioning now only because we have asked him to. If you persist in believing that we are not independent, then you must be planning to send up a new warden.
Protector.
Warden. Let us not mince words. Though if we knew who he is to be, we might be happy to call him ambassador. We might be able to work with him. It might not be necessary to send him with armed hoodlums to rape and murder our women.
Order! Order! The witness will come to order!
It is not I who was not in order, honorable chairman. Rape it was, and murder most foul. But that is history, and now we must look to the future. Whom are you going to exile?
Prof struggled to raise self on elbow, and I was suddenly alert. Was a cue.
For you all know, sir, that it is a one-way trip. I was born here. You can see what effort it is for me to return even temporarily to the planet which has disinherited me. We are outcasts of Earth who...
He collapsed, was up out of my chair, and collapsed myself, trying to reach him. Was not all play acting, even though I answered a cue. Is terrible strain on heart to get up suddenly on Terra. Thick field grabbed and smashed me to floor. And that is going to have to do it for me today, because I got stuff I got to do. Hope people are enjoying it. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the book, which is the actual politicking, the trying to convince the basically them having to plead their case to the peoples of Earth and be like, hey, we just want what, we want fairness. All right. Hope people are enjoying. Probably another 5 or 6 more installments of this over the coming weeks. And then I will figure out what I'm doing next. And we'll go from there. If you do enjoy this, feel free to catch me live. I do this every week on Saturdays at noon Eastern Standard Time, usually. Though I've been starting a bit earlier so I can get it done in time to do my other obligations. I do have other streams throughout the week. Mecha Mondays, where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. Warframe Wednesdays, where I do something Warframe related for a couple hours. And then this, Storytime Saturdays, where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud, as opposed to in my head, which would be a whole lot of nobody hearing anything other than me breathing. Which is practically what happens now, except you hear my voice go from being jaunty and jovial and Russian to croaking and dying because I don't talk a lot most of the time, I swear. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, or listening to this after the fact, probably on my YouTube. I promise I'm going to get around to organizing the YouTube stuff for the last couple of months. Sometime, hopefully, it'll be done before the end of the year. I could tell you that with great authority, but I can't tell you when that's going to be. So my apologies having to sort through these all the hard way. Fortunately, I've tried to keep the labeling halfway intelligent, except for the Warframe Wednesday stuff, which all is just Warframe Wednesdays. There's no date stamp on those. Or no numerical numbering for each installment. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. Have a great week. Stay healthy, wealthy, and wise. Best 1 out of 3. And enjoy life as best you can. And read a good book, damn it. Jeez.
Seriously, read more. Reading's important. That's why I do these, because they're fun. Not even for education purposes, just keep your brain active. No, reading forum threads and Twitter stuff and Facebook posts does not count. Gotta be an actual constructed book. Thank you. This has been my TED Talk. See you next time, folks. Have a good one.